Good morning. My name is Todd Sanders, and I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Chamber. We appreciate you joining us for today's important conversation. The Chamber is dedicated to ensuring our business community receives up-to-date, relevant information during this time, and would not be possible without our many partners. I'd like to begin by thanking today's sponsors who continue to demonstrate their commitment to our Chamber, community, and our state. So a virtual round of applause for APS, SRP, and Fenimore Craig for their strong support. We're thrilled to be here today to hear from Maricopa County Sheriff Paul Penzone. We've asked Sheriff Penzone to share an update on how the Sheriff's Office is continuing to respond to relevant public safety and law enforcement demands, especially in light of the tragic death of Floyd George, the resulting protests and riots that occurred a few nights ago. After Sheriff Penzone gives us his updates, we'll take some questions from you, so submit your questions through the Q&A box and we'll attempt to get through as many as possible, time permitting. So now it's my pleasure to turn it over to our speaker, Maricopa County Sheriff Paul Penzone. He has a combined 30 years of law enforcement and public safety experience. Resume includes a 21-year career with the Phoenix Police Department, with 7 dedicated to the department's nationally recognized Silent Witness program. After retiring from Phoenix PD, the sheriff spent time as Vice President of Child Help, a nonprofit dedicated to the treatment and prevention of child abuse. Sheriff Penzone, I want to thank you for your service to our community and for joining us this morning. We'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much for the time. I always appreciate just the opportunity to make this about your concerns and what's going on throughout the community. I would tell you that I don't know that we've seen a more challenging time than we face right now. And I don't mean just specifically to law enforcement. I mean our community at large and even on a national scale. At the same time, we have this opportunity to recalibrate who we are as people, to find ways to be better, to do better, and to make a positive difference that is sustainable. You know, I've seen a lot of different trends in crime throughout my career, but never thought that we would be impacted with a pandemic where our first responders, as well as our detention officers, had to overcome this challenge of finding a way to fend off a biological threat while still focusing on public safety. So our role has changed dramatically. And now, as we're trying to recover and come back from that unique challenge, we see what has occurred. And I'm just going to be very honest with you, as I always have and always will be, to tell you what we're seeing is not an isolated incident. It is a failure that we have time and time again fallen short to overcome. And then things become combustible. And when things become combustible because good people are affected in a negative way, it creates opportunity for the criminal element to weave its way into that process and undermine safety, undermine trust, undermine confidence at a scale that, you know, it takes a considerable amount of time to overcome. So even in the face of what we're challenged with now, there lies this opportunity for us to show the community at large that law enforcement really does represent greatness in many ways, and that the majority of men and women who participate in this profession do it with the right intentions and do it with a commitment to make a positive impact on the community. But if we don't do a good enough job to vet out and address the issues of those who have failed us or those who are malice in their actions, then it ends up diminishing, if not destroying, the reputation that we work so hard to earn, which is directly aligned with trust. So this organization, I think, has come a long way in the last few years, but we still have a long way to go as a profession, as an organization. And it takes more than words. It takes leading by example through actions to show that we're taking steps to overcome what we have seen, you know, far too many times. So, Todd, I don't know exactly process. I didn't look through the agenda, but with that, I'll just kind of close it and go to the next step, and we can start talking about important issues. So, what would you like me to begin with?
Well, thank you so much for your service, for being with us today. These are uncertain times. You know, we do want to talk about what's going on in terms of the coronavirus. Clearly, first responders, you know, I can't imagine what they're having to deal with just this pandemic that's going on. But want to obviously address the elephants in the room. You know, I think it's important to note that clearly we have I think across the country, incredible police forces that are doing good work on a daily basis. Many friends of mine I count you among them. But it is important, obviously, to recognize that that we did have a criminal act occur in Minnesota that resulted in the death of someone unnecessarily. And now you're having to deal with the protests here. A lot of them peaceful and appropriate. Obviously, a lot of riots. I know your family was impacted by that. Talk to us about how the department's handling that. What are you telling your officers as they go out and try and deal with peaceful protests and obviously people who are choosing to use this opportunity to riot and to have that criminal element come in?
Sure, thank you. So I think it's important that I start with how you're affected. We have seen the majority of the protest and a volume of our residents coming out to be heard occurring in the downtown Phoenix area. So as I express that to you, I want to make sure that I give credit where credit is truly due. The Phoenix Police Department has been the focal point of this message. And I'm looking out my window right now, and I can tell you I can see straight to Washington and to Phoenix headquarters, and that's where everything really took place aside from the Capitol. And in my opinion, they handled themselves exceptionally because they tried to find this space of showing strength as it relates to protecting our infrastructure and our community, but at the same time showing patience so that those who wanted to peacefully protest could be heard. But what normally happens in this cycle is that you have those that truly come with emotion and frustration and disappointment and anger, and they want to be heard. And then you find others who see that opportunity for their benefit, and whether it is to be destructive in certain ways, whether it is to loot, whether it is to just act with violence as though that is justifiable because they have seen violence that is unacceptable. And in neither case is it acceptable. But the Phoenix Police Department really created a space for that to occur peacefully. And then as we see an escalation as the evening went on, when they took steps, and again, I see it right across the street. I'm in an emergency operations center where we have cameras all over the area to include drone coverage. So it's real-time live stuff. And I'm also listening to the radio, and I can hear how they execute their operations. And it was absolutely with this very methodical process to allow for it to occur, but to make sure that they were protective of the environment and the people. And as the evening went on, it was necessary for them to utilize some tactics that we prefer not to see. They're using gas, they're using certain deployments to try to quell the escalation of violence. And their arrests were not by choice, their arrests by circumstance, meaning that they weren't looking to just put handcuffs on people. If they arrested someone, from what I had seen, it was because that person was in violation of the law or was facilitating the escalation of violence, and it was a necessary act. So Phoenix PD was out there in the front lines, and then my department, we were mobilized, as was Phoenix PD. So we had, as many as 300 deputies in different capacities, all working in some way to be prepared to support Phoenix PD's needs. As an example, once we saw protesters marching towards Chase Ballpark, recognizing that there was areas there that could be vandalized, my team would deploy and be kind of the support system relative to either backing up their efforts or kind of boxing off certain areas to limit and restrict movement for the protesters. If they went to the west, we had DPS there holding the line for the Capitol to make sure that it was protected. And then one of the number one tactics was for protesters to try to take the freeway, which not only is it very dangerous for the protesters, but it's very disruptive in other ways that can promote an escalation of violence. You start seeing things, like vehicles being burned and other aspects. So shutting down those access points. Now, when you look at the media and you see certain things, it's like the tip of the iceberg. It tells a very small percentage of the story. But as we stand today, what makes me proud is that we gave space for a voice, but I've yet to see any examples of police brutality, as we shouldn't see, that occurred in this community. Being able to hold that heightened level of ethics and professionalism in the face of what was incendiary devices being thrown at officers, frozen water bottles, river rocks, anything that came up off the ground. And again, not by the masses, but by the small percentages who were hidden within the mass. It went on for lengthy periods of time. Our employees were working until 3, 4 in the morning every day with very little rest. But that's what we do. Now let's flip to the other side, which is really, how do we get here? As I stated earlier, we saw this horrific incident, which was criminal nature and that we should all condemn, that occurred in Minnesota. But I run an office where not too long ago, racial profiling was not only accepted, but it was promoted. You know, we're under 2 federal court orders. Those things are unacceptable in any walk of life, let alone in law enforcement. And not only do we need to stand in opposition to it, but we have to be quick to act when it relates to those egregious acts. And when we fail to act with expedience, then we see this problem rise back up again. So I say with confidence to you, I feel like we're in the healing stage now, and I'm hopeful that we don't see a continuation of the protests and that's attached to maybe vandalism or violence, that we start to get in that space where we talk and we act on solutions, and don't let this just go quietly into the night and then suddenly we wait for the next occurrence, because there will be another occurrence. You know, we're in a profession that's high risk and high volume, and it is led by humans. So whether it's human nature, whether it is implicit or explicit bias, there's always going to be a representative within your organization who acts in a manner that does not reflect your values. But as the head of the organization, that's where my job is so important, that when we address it, we make it abundantly clear we will not tolerate it. When you're given this type of authority, you know, our job is to be the caretakers of this authority, to be the guardians of a community. And if we can't earn public trust, what's going on right now shows you how fragile that authority is. Because when people no longer respect you, they no longer respect the authority that they've given you, and that's when you have civil unrest. Now, we saw a lot of chatter going on, and I got a lot of calls from friends that lived in some of the more affluent or you know, areas where there's a low volume of minorities and a higher volume of Caucasians, saying we hear they're going to start targeting homes, or we hear that they're, you know, 24th Street in Camelback, or you know, in Arcadia. That is a terrorist tactic. They're trying to invoke fear, because when we looked at the news and we saw what occurred at Fashion Square, where it was overrun, and all of a sudden you say, hold on a second, where's that line of stability? Are we this vulnerable? You know, circumstantially, that, you know, that circumstance was challenging, and I think it set us all back. Now they take advantage of that moment and they say, I'm coming to your house and your family's in jeopardy. Well, the reality of that is very slim, if even realistic. I don't believe that it is. But the drumbeat of promoting fear through that communication puts a lot of good people on edge. You start to worry for your children, your family, your property. This is a community of 4.5 million people. Quite frankly, in the protests, if we encapsulated the entire numbers, it's, you know, maybe 1,000 people, and of that, a very small percentage are involved in criminal activity. We as a collective group are much stronger than any criminal element that wants to oppose us. And when I say we as a group, I'm not talking to law enforcement, I'm talking to the public at large. We have to come together to set standards of who we are and what we stand for, and that having a community that is grounded in safety and health for our families is a strong message and a strong force if we're united. And then we have to identify these issues of concern and find solutions, because the community will no longer tolerate excuses, and we never should. So I think that's how we got to the space that we're in. Now the question is, where are we going to go from here? So for me, I've already reached out, and I'm always very cautious. For those of you who know me, I do not want to exploit. I don't want to be opportunistic. I don't want this to be about Paul Penzone as a sheriff. I want it to be about men and women in uniform serving a community. So I've spoken to a lot of representatives from minority communities about ways that we can go forward with a unified message, ways that we can create opportunity for law enforcement to show humility and understanding and compassion, and ways for us to come together and show strength on where we're going to go from here. My messages to my employees have been very direct and very matter of fact. If you think it's okay for an act like that to reflect who we are, then understand that your legacy has become meaningless. If we don't have the courage to call out those wearing the badge and the uniform when they have acted in a criminal manner that is in conflict with our values, then we don't have the right to say that we're some type of, you know, heroic profession that is founded in courage if we lack the courage to point out within our own ranks what's wrong. And I think it makes us stronger. So now we're trying to build that mentality of lead by example, and then our, you know, our actions are really the things that make the strongest statements. But if we fail to, our words are meaningless. So when it comes to that part of the story, I hope that covers a lot of the ground for you. But before we get to COVID, which was the biggest story 2 weeks ago, that to me is the most important issue we're dealing with.
You know, absolutely. And I want to touch on that a little bit more. But one of the, I mean, clearly we have first responders who, since since really March, have been under tremendous amount of stress and amount of pressure. And as I said, the vast majority of officers out there are the good guys. You know, what are you telling those folks that in many quarters are being, vilified? And how are, what's the best way to talk to the community about the vast majority of folks that are out there doing the right thing and protecting us and our businesses?
It's I think best served if I just paint the scenario. I always tell my employees, if we're going to overcome federal oversight and prove that we're worthy of this authority, we have to be willing to put the work in to get there. Because to earn trust and a healthy relationship, it really doesn't take a lot. Most often humans give you the benefit of the doubt right out of the chute, and we want to have a healthy relationship. But when we fail, we have to 10 times, 100 times over prove our value. And if you're not willing to, then who? If you really believe that this star that I wear on my chest stands for something, you have to be willing to sacrifice to get it back to the place where it is appreciated and respected. So because of what happened historically, SB 1070 and the aftermath of that, we have work to do. So I tell my employees this: you will face criticism, but there is no greater opportunity to prove time and time again why you're worthy of praise, because then when you come out on the other side, it shines that much brighter. So although we're facing criticism, we do hear from the silent majority often. I mean, this morning I'm grabbing coffee and somebody's like, "Thank you so much for your service. I appreciate what you do." And I extend my gratitude, but I say, please do me a favor. When you see a man or woman in uniform who's really doing the work, not me, make sure they hear that from you also. Our narrative internally, and I hope you're seeing this, people, the compliment I get most often is, "Thanks for not being on the news, Sheriff." And I say, "Oh, you're welcome. I prefer not to." But our stories are about the men and women. We go out and we seek out the person who works in fiscal, management, who's paying our bills, and tell their story. And that's what goes on our Facebook or what goes out through our internal messages. I'll find the person who is a canine deputy and tell their story, because that's what the community appreciates. They appreciate hearing about their neighbor who works in this organization, who does the line level work and has an appreciation for it. So what I'm trying to do is give the organization back to them and help them feel good about why they work in the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, but also help them understand if this job was easy, anybody would do it. Anyone could step up and say, "Hey, I'm a hero. Look, I'm putting a uniform on." It takes a special kind of person to want to do this, but it takes an exceptional person to want to do it right. And then that's the choice. Are you up for the task? And as I said earlier, if not you, then who? If your family was in need and you knew law enforcement is taking all kinds of criticism, but someone in uniform had to give them the service to keep them safe, if you're not up for the task, who are you going to assign it to? Because I hope it's you. But if not, somebody's going to have to. So whatever you want for your family, you have to be willing to do and sacrifice for others. The absolute stranger who you know nothing about, who maybe even has offended you at some point in time, but because we stand for something greater, respect is a gift we give to others. It's not something we expect in return. But if you stay to that commitment, everything comes full circle. And then we get this sense of unity and appreciation on a community scale. So this is one of our most difficult times, but it's also one of our greatest opportunities. Can I fold into COVID for a minute, Todd? Is that okay?
Please.
Let's wind the clock back. And I'll share a personal story with you just to set the tone. In January, so my wife and I have a lot of family in Italy. So every year we travel to visit, and we happen to be in Italy in January. Well, I wasn't aware that it was the Chinese New Year, but there was a high volume of visitors in Rome on vacation from China, and everybody was wearing masks. Now, that's not uncommon in the Chinese culture because they have pollution, other issues, but it just seemed to be a lot. And I wasn't even aware of coronavirus at the time. And then as we traveled back, I stopped off in London for a day, just not because I was, getting paid so much that I could have that kind of luxury, but that was just where the layover was. And it was the same thing there. We saw a lot of guests from China all wearing masks. Then all of a sudden I got home and we started to see the escalation in Italy and some of the other countries. So because we were staying in contact with our family, I understood the capacity of it and recognized, we're not immune to it. Once it reaches the States, we're going to have a problem. So by early March, when we really saw the escalation, we started to reach out through the private sector, through you folks, trying to determine how we could get lanes of access to PPE gear. Because if you're unaware, we have 3,500 employees in the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. And we have, the fourth largest sheriff's office in the nation, but I think it's the second or third largest jail system. So every day of the year, we have 7,500 to 8,500 inmates in our jail system, and 100,000 go through our doors annually. So now I'm responsible for what is about 11,000 individuals every single day. And to put it into context, most inmates are in and out within 72 hours. You know, the average length of stay is 3 months, but most are in and out within 72 hours. So if someone comes into our jail system and is not protected from a biological threat, they're going back out in the community, which means that you and your family are at a greater risk. And the same applies for my employees. You know, we have 2,200 detention officers in the jail system. If they are infected, not only does it impact their health and their families, but that's one less body that I have to provide public safety for everyone. So we actually started to get a private stockpile of PPE gear, sanitizing, and different detergents for disinfecting, and gloves and things like that. We made the decision that every inmate would get a surgical mask coming in the door. So the least expensive ones, the little blue ones you see that they put over their face, every inmate would get one, just to have a layer of safety. Every detention officer and deputy would get either a KN95, an N95, or a cloth mask, or actually they've gotten all of the above. And that we would find a way to responsibly replenish these items to reduce the exposure. Now, step two was, how do I reduce the jail population but not adversely impact public safety? So in speaking with some of my colleagues, chiefs at other agencies, I asked, would you consider passing a message to your officers? Please do not book anyone for a nonviolent misdemeanor offense. Either write them a citation or long form the charge, but don't bring them through our doors, because they're likely going to be in and out within 24 to 72 hours. It comes at a cost to taxpayers, but it also comes at a population expansion. So they were agreeable. And we went from early March, an inmate population of 7,500. As of yesterday, I think it was 4,500. So we reduced the jail population by 3,000, and we have not seen a spike in crime, because I pay attention to the stats every day. So we have had less than, I think our total number of positive COVID tests inside our jail system is 15. And for our employees, I think we're still sub 20. And if you think about the number of 10,000 or so with a cycle of 150 come through the jail every day, we have been very fortunate. Now I'm knocking on wood, because I know that these things surge and dip. But we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to make sure we keep the public safe. And sometimes that means health safety. And if I'm not caring for these inmates, if I saw infection and it impacted my employees and the staffing model declined, not only are we unsafe on a health risk, but we're unsafe in a public safety setting also. So we've been very aggressive in our efforts. Every single day we have a conference call and go over the numbers and try to see if there's any trends in certain parts of our jail or in certain populations. But if someone's symptomatic, they go right to medical observation. Everybody who comes through the door, we keep in a pack and we keep them together until they're released, so that if there is a positive, asymptomatic person in that group, that if there's an outbreak, we can contain it to a small number. I am not going to stop booking people. I am not going to release people from our custody to the jeopardy of the community safety, but we are going to make good decisions relative to who and how we're incarcerating to make sure that it is fiscally responsible, that it's health responsible, and that most importantly, when it comes to crime in the community, that we're managing it.
Well, I appreciate that. It's certainly commendable that you could have that kind of outcome in such a confined space. And I'm assuming that's going to be a model for the country. Speaking of PPEs, it's certainly a big topic of discussion. We're in this for the long haul. Do you have enough, thinking about, going into the fall and potentially another spike, do you feel like you have enough equipment to ensure that your officers are safe and protected going forward?
Right now we do, and we seem to have created our own, streamline to replenish as needed. Every employee got 2 cloth masks that you can wash and reuse, and they come with N95 liners. Now we'll need to get some surplus to replace those as needed. The surgical masks, now we have more vendors that are bringing those to the table, so we're fine. My concern is, and one other step we've taken, just so you know, I'm sure nobody on this call speeds or violates traffic laws, but if you did and you were in our jurisdiction, you would find that our deputies use a plastic bag to transfer everything. They wear gloves to make sure there's no direct contact, and we take additional steps out in the public. I am concerned, as everyone is, that as the state opened back up again, we're starting to see that surge, right? We're starting to see the kick up again. When do we start to get that flattening? Because whether it is through antibodies or other steps prior to a vaccine, that we see stabilization. Because as we get into fall, if we see like we do with other, and I'm no health expert, but when we see with other infections like the flu, if we see another spike again, I don't believe we are prepared or willing to go back to where we were before with a shutdown, which means exposures are going to be at a higher volume. And there is no law enforcement agency in this community or anywhere in the nation that can afford to lose 10 to 15% of their workforce and still function effectively. I'm also impacted, and this is in your lane, and I say yours because, you know, the chamber is so invested in economic growth and development. We're going to see budget cuts because we saw, you know, now what is 3 months of adverse impact on the economy. We've already had a 2% cut. We're going to be looking at 3 and 5% potential cuts, which means that this organization, as an example, has not expanded in size in over a decade. And because of our federal court oversight, we've actually diverted resources specifically for that need, which means they were taken out of first responder positions to do, you know, what is basically audits. I can't afford to see a diminished workforce and serve a community that is the fastest growing in the nation, that has grown by, I think it's, you would know better than I, but like 12 or 13% population in the last 10 years, yet the department hasn't expanded at all. So the economic impact isn't just about dollars and cents, it is about staffing model and resources. And if we have the combination of that with potential health illness, we're going to have some challenges that we have never seen, that I'm really concerned about how we overcome them. But I want to assure you, we will find a way. The one thing that I will tell you about this organization is resilient, and they're really excited about the direction we've been headed, and they're with you, you know, every day of every week, trying to make a difference. So we'll overcome, but just know we're going to face some challenges, and we're going to need your help to get through it.
Well, thank you, and we're certainly here to be a partner in this for the long haul. You mentioned sort of encounters with citizens, and clearly that's a big part of what occurs with your officers. You know, thinking about vulnerable populations, to the extent that they do have an encounter with one of the officers out there. Talk to us about, you know, you talked about, I guess, using a plastic bag, but what are some of the protocols in place to ensure safety, not only for the citizens, but also for your officers beyond this idea of a plastic bag? How are they going about stops and things like that?
Yeah, I don't want you to make the impression that the best I could come up with was a sandwich baggie to keep us safe from COVID. You know, we have tried to be really proactive in some of our steps to monitor our own employees to make sure that if they do have, you know, we have hard protocols depending on your exposure or circumstances. We will pull you out of service. We have what is about a 24 to 48 hour turnaround on most of the testing now for our first responders. But ultimately, we have to be disciplined when it comes to the social distancing, wearing the masks, how we encounter, because this profession, we put hands on people every day. You know, we don't have this luxury of just asking politely and you're going to comply. You walk into a jail system, people are in there because they're non-compliant. So I don't have some type of, you know, we're going to bubble wrap you and you're going to be safe solution. It is really about disciplines every day. How committed are we to ensuring that we do everything possible to protect ourselves? The hand washing, the not touching our face, the wearing the mask, the putting on gloves, making sure that when we go home, our uniform comes off and it goes into a separate pile and we wash it separately. We don't bring it into the home. It can cross-contaminate for our own family's sake. You know, we even at certain points in time had considered, when we were unsure of the escalation, and let me give you a backstory. This community actually passed a funding source a few years ago to build a new jail. So our jail was just built and finalized in April, but we didn't open it because of the different type of supervision. It's called direct supervision, where it's more communal. We're trying to reduce stress and anxiety for nonviolent offenders and facilitate them through the process more quickly to save taxpayer dollars. Well, it was supposed to open in April, but we had to postpone that because of COVID. Now what we've done is we've actually taken the population out of our oldest jail and moved them into that facility where we can, you know, lock people down and not have direct supervision, because there's a portion of it that holds about 1,200 inmates. So our oldest jail, Durango jail, is now vacant. We just made that move a few days ago. It can hold up to 1,000 people. We had one point in time where we were considering with our employees, do we actually find some space, and not that we want to put them in jail, But if they were working long hours as they are right now, can we find a space where they can just sleep, and get cleaned up and come back to work so that they don't have a negative impact on their own families? We've worked with the National Guard to acquire more supplies for safety. But there's no playbook on this. We're writing it as we go, and we've had success, but we don't have a perfect formula as yet. But my employees are the number one, they're the number one priority. They're our most valuable assets, and we need to make sure we take care of them so they can take care of you.
Well, and it's clear that you've done a lot on that front, and I think you bring up a good point. And the families of these officers are truly, they're right there on the front lines as well. And I think it's important to remember that. We have a few questions, and you told me nothing was off the table, so I want to go ahead and go to those. One question was, your predecessor cost the taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. Can you speak to your fiscal management in your first term to help reduce that burden? And that was from one of our attendees.
That must be an attendee who likes me, because that's a good question. So thank you. To date, the Melendrez lawsuit, which is the federal court orders, the two federal court orders, I think it's approaching 150 million or more in expenses to taxpayers because of that one. When I took the office, the most sobering moment that I had was when I had to sit down with the attorneys and go through about 250 lawsuits that were pending historically. So I made it abundantly clear to our organization, not only did we have to do better, but we had to recognize our obligation to fiscal responsibility, which means every egregious act or every error costs taxpayer dollars, which means it costs us resources. So I basically made a challenge, and I said, we're going to find ways to run lean. And because this office was one of the lowest paid in the county, there were like 22 law enforcement agencies, and I think deputies were the second lowest paid in the county. I wanted to inspire them, saying, hey, I promise you, if we can save dollars, you will be rewarded. So we did a couple of things. We cut other lawsuits. So not cutting Melendrez, which is out of my control, but the year that I took the office, there was a tail of about $8 million in lawsuits that were paid out from the prior administration. After year one, it was cut to 4. Year 2, it was cut down to $2 million. And there's still a tail. As a matter of fact, there's a trial right now that I sit in, or that's about to start, where my predecessor will also be present because it was under his management. So there's still a tail that's hanging, but we've cut lawsuits by about 75%. We've seen a decline in claims against the office every year that I've been here. Year 1, my first full fiscal budget, we came in $20 million under budget. Last year, we came in $10 million under budget. But I told you I made a promise to my employees, and I held my promise. When we came in $20 million under budget, I took some of those dollars and used them to give pay increases to employees. We also bought safety equipment, and we added some positions. Now, the county has been exceptional. I want to give credit to the Board of Supervisors because we have seen economic growth and a better tax base. The last few years, we've seen increases coming straight from the county directly. All in all, I think the average raise over the last 2 years for our employees is about 12%. It doesn't make up the ground to really make us competitive on the scale, but we're more towards the middle and the bottom than we were before. So there's this balance of fiscal responsibility leading to fiscal benefit, but it's also good for taxpayers when I can give money back to the county. There's also this variable that isn't tangible, and that is when we do it right. And I have employees who in the past said, you know what, Sheriff, I'll tell someone I work for the county. I will not say I work for the county sheriff's office because they would face criticism. Now they walk out there and they say, I'm proud to tell people I work in the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. So there's this balance of, yes, they're getting paid a little bit more, and they, like everyone else, they'd like to see greater benefits. But you also have to have purpose. You have to go to work knowing that what you do matters and that the people you serve who are complete strangers have an appreciation, because that is a value that you can't really monetize. So we're trying to find that balance in this organization that we are more appealing to others. And I'll give you an example if you don't mind, Todd, but we saw, I'm trying to think of what the percentage of increase was in hiring, but as an example, last year alone, we hired, I think it was 400 new detention officers. So when you look at attrition and other factors, you really have to chase it. But when I took the office, we had a 13 to 14% vacancy ratio. We had 350 detention officer vacancies. Prior to COVID, we had 35. The reason I'm telling you that is historically, if someone wanted to be in law enforcement, they weren't looking at this agency as the number one pick. Now, not only are we seeing a considerable spike in hiring, but we see officers from other agencies wanting to lateral over to be a Maricopa County Sheriff's deputy. And I don't know if there's any greater compliment than that for the men and women in this organization, because they're the ambassadors of our reputation. So fiscally responsible, but also reaping rewards of just reputation benefit, I guess is the best way I could define it.
Well, certainly a big job, and congratulations on the progress so far. I have another question that from one of our folks watching says, can you talk about protesters going to rural areas of the state like Payson and Prescott or others to create marches and protests that are not local? And I don't know if you can comment on that since it's out of your jurisdiction, but perhaps you have some information.
Well, we do cover a lot of rural areas. You know, Maricopa County is actually larger than I think 7 states. We have 9,000 square miles that we cover. So we do have some rural areas. And I would never give a definitive statement saying unequivocally this could never happen. That would be naive of me. I just think the probability is very, very low. You will see certain groups or rogue individuals trying to use this wave of frustration that's occurring in this kind of, you know, civil movement and look to be advantageous for their own purpose. That's where it's so important that we stay united. You know, when people were saying, hey, you know, are they going to go door to door and attack our houses and our families? Could someone do that? Sure. But in Arizona, where I don't know what the percentage of gun owners is in homes, but it's pretty high. I know someone has a saying that says that door, my front door isn't there to protect me, it's there to protect you. So although they talk this talk, what you've seen across the country is targeting businesses that are unoccupied after hours for what is sheerly looting. It is just low-level criminals looking to commit theft and vandalism. In our homes, we always have to be vigilant. In the rural areas, you don't have the same level of resources that we have in highly populated municipal areas. So yes, err on the side of caution, but don't live in fear. You know, their greatest power over us is to create fear. Our greatest strength is to say, no, I'm going to stand my ground. I'm going to protect myself, and I'm going to work with my neighbor to do the same. And please, unequivocally, stand and speak against racial discrimination and bias. It is offensive, inappropriate, and it just goes against every value that we have as people to think that the color of skin, race, religion, ethnicity, all these different things should be dividing points for us. There are good men and women in every walk of life. It is the behavior itself that we should be focusing on. So don't fear a person or mistreat a person because they're different than us. Look for the common ground, come together, and it's the greatest form of strength. So whether it's in rural areas, whether it is in the center of our city, there are criminals and there are good people. And that's the only difference between us. And that's the only thing that should be a difference. But we're a far more powerful force than the small percentage of criminals that try to intimidate, create fear.
Thank you for that. Absolutely agree with you. Going back to sort of the work that you've all had to do in terms of making sure that people could be out there doing the work that we need to do during this pandemic, MCSO created a supply pantry to help employees, including especially first responders, make sure they had the supplies they need. How is that going, and what can we do to continue to support that effort to make sure that we're properly supporting our first responders?
Well, I'm going to start by returning the compliment. As I joined early, my understanding is you either just had a wellness session or you're about to. I commend you for doing that, because wellness is something that we should deliver, not wait for people to ask for. Last year in law enforcement, we had the highest percentage nationally of suicides in our profession in our history. And it has to do with all the stressors that impact those in this profession. So at that point, and this is prior to COVID or anything else, I reached out to the board of supervisors and I told them I wanted to create a wellness division, you know, much like what you've already done, because law enforcement are unlikely to ask for help. It's a stigma, and you feel like, well, we're bigger, stronger, faster, therefore we can overcome everything. Well, you know, we have challenges at home. We may have children who are ill or have special needs. We could have domestic challenges or financial issues that are complicating our world. Then suddenly we go to work and we're dealing with everyone else's issues. So we're in the process now, even though we're facing some setbacks, of building our wellness division. And what it's going to be is just like you're doing, bringing resources to our employees, making the decision on their behalf that they're going to participate in certain programs that help them address issues of stress or financial setback or things that I described. So when COVID kicked off, we did two things. We started this employee pantry, but we also created an employee working group, and they have a voice, and their voice is to tell me, these are the things that we need, Sheriff. Here are issues of concern. Here's how we can heighten communication that is two-way so that, we're doing all kinds of positive things. So the pantry is just that. We have had donors from the outside give us resources and financial support, and we've had employees who have brought in items, because as crazy as it is, whoever thought we would be searching for toilet paper? But imagine if you come to work and you have children, you can't get formula, you can't get diapers, you can't get all the basic necessities, and you go to work and you're trying to keep a community safe, yet you're worried for your children at home. So the pantry was organic, and it was really, how can we supply it internally and get support from the outside and start delivering items of need to our employees? And to date, I think we've served like 125 or so employees who had very specific needs, so they didn't have to worry for these things. It's improved morale dramatically because they recognize that they are valued in the organization. It's created a pathway for outside organizations. The Cardinals, some other organizations have delivered meals to our employees. Gosh, I'm forgetting the name. This is terrible. The Phoenix, Tommy, help me out with the cookies. The Phoenix Mission, Rescue Mission. They delivered like 1,000 cookies to us that we give out to the employees. So when they go to work and they have, a case of Gatorade or Power Bar standing by, they may not even need it, but the gesture itself helps them feel better about, during a difficult time, that coming to work matters and that people recognize it. So the pantry has been great. The wellness division is just getting off the ground and getting up and running. I just feel like an organization that cares for its people first and foremost is an organization that thrives. And, people will treat others as they're treated. So if I, as the head of this organization, show that I'm invested in these men and women, when they interact with you in the community, your family members, whomever, there's a sense of pride and respect that all of a sudden begins to exude from their actions, because they're not dealing with frustrations that we've removed on their behalf. And I think we all function better that way.
Absolutely. Well, leadership matters, and thank you for that. And certainly, I'm glad that exists. And if there's anything we can do, if you can pass that along to us, we will make sure that we pass that along to our members and the folks watching. Let me pivot a little bit. It's hard to imagine that we had another life beyond all this, but during the legislative session, there was some talk about criminal justice reform. And other, states are kind of looking at this in different ways. We were promoting something that would help people who are coming out pay their dues, to maybe this idea that you aren't looking at what they did before when you're hiring them, or a broad variety of criminal justice reform ideas. Any thoughts on what we should be thinking about as we look at potentially bringing back a criminal justice reform bill next year?
Yeah, I think much like the circumstance of law enforcement reform, we have a considerable opportunity in criminal justice reform. And I always have to give this disclaimer to make sure there's no confusion. I've been in this profession, as you heard, for a long time, and I'm unequivocally in it because there are people out there who need to be held accountable for violation of the law. And there are people out there that are very dangerous that need to be incarcerated to keep our families safe. So don't ever confuse my message with being soft on the issue of protecting a community. But the community of those who are in the criminal justice system is very broad in spectrum. It could be mental health issues. It could be substance or alcohol abuse. It could be factors where people act in a manner due to circumstances, commit crimes, and once they're held accountable, if we can find a way to help them help themselves, they won't repeat the behavior. Then there's that scale of those that are just always going to be in our walls. If you care about the bottom line, it costs $325 to book a person in jail day one and $125 every day thereafter to keep them. So I'll give you a little perspective on why I believe there's a great opportunity. I told you about the reduction in the jail population because of COVID. And when we took these steps, I immediately began to look every day at the crime trends to make sure that we didn't see an escalation because of it. And we have not. Now, it's still early, so I want to be cautious. But if when this is all said and done, I have a considerable amount of data that shows low-level offenders who would normally be out within 48 hours and don't pose an ongoing threat, if we find a different pathway to hold them accountable and have consequences, and incarceration is not the first option, it is, second, third, or fourth, does it provide a financial benefit where we could take those dollars and redirect them to education or healthcare? That's number one. Number two, if you have a family member who has ever made a bad decision or done something bad and had consequences, what we don't want to see when someone we care about is the collateral impact, meaning, do they lose their job? Do they lose their, their stability at home? Does it have some other effect on their loved ones, where if we could find consequences that are appropriate, but help them be sustainable, isn't it better for all? Because what we don't want is to see repeat behavior. When I shut Tent City, we started a program called Mosaic. It's a drug recovery program. And I was able to just reallocate some space to create 2 dormitories, one for men and one for women. And they go through a 7-week drug recovery program inside the jail system that is aligned with their release date. And then when they're outside, they're connected to another 7 weeks of that service outside. In 3 years now, we have data, and it appears as though there's a 20% reduction in recidivism for those who go through that drug recovery program versus their peer group who don't. So if we can look for ways to address mental illness, get people back on their meds, get them counseling if they need, and then connect them when they're released from jail to stay on track, and to facilitate court dates and other things that oftentimes can be detrimental, because if they miss them, they get a warrant for their arrest and they're back in the system. We can find a way to help those folks be healthy and keep them out of our system and not committing crime. When it comes to drug addiction, listen, everyone's got to be accountable for their own decisions, and consequences, or there should be consequences for their behaviors. But if we can find a way without costing taxpayers extra dollars to help them get on a path to drug recovery, and they leave and they find a job and they don't come back, is it better for all of us? Same thing applies in other areas. So if we can find trade opportunities to teach skills, if we can infuse programs where inmates contribute and taxpayer costs are reduced, is not a good thing. If we can take all the data that we're crunching right now and see the reduced jail population and determine where the strengths and weaknesses lie, and actually do things based off of data and analytics when we make decisions for public safety. And I'm not saying you go completely in that direction, but it has a value. Doesn't it make sense to be a profession that puts some science or data into our decision making, much like crime analysis, but incarceration analysis, so we are spending our dollars the right way? There's just so much opportunity, but it has to be a partnership. It has to be private sector and public government, or in government, coming together to find ways. Does somebody want to create a space to have a program where we teach a trade, or we provide education? And I'll share this with you real quick, Todd. I know we're coming to the end of the hour pretty soon. If you're unaware, we investigate crimes against animals. That's part of our responsibility. And oftentimes those animals become evidence. If they're harmed in some way, we take custody of them until the court deems the outcome. So one of our oldest jails downtown, which is, 25 years ago was deemed to be unhealthy to incarcerate people, is actually where all the animals are kept. It's Mayberry. It's old school jail. You walk down the hall, and one side there's a jail cell with dogs, cats, and that's what we got. I mean, I'm not Dr. Doolittle, trust me. I never thought I'd be the dog whisperer when I took this job, but there was an opportunity. The opportunity was twofold. Can I find private dollars to build a brand new facility that is truly designed for animal care and put it out at the jail system instead of downtown? So we got estimates. It's going to take between $8.5 and $10 million to build a state-of-the-art facility for animals, where it has a different type of space, because these animals could be with us anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on the court cycle. So they have to be in an environment where they can thrive, not just a kennel where they're adopted 2 weeks later. We could have a dog park, we could have a classroom, and we could have a facility for my employees where they can take a shower after a major seizure and get cleaned up and back to work. But imagine this. Right now, we have about 8 to 10 female inmates who work with the animals every day, and it helps in their recovery. If I had that facility, I could have 20 to 30 to 40 inmates working with animals every day. It helps moms who don't know how to parent learn to care and give compassion to another living being. It helps veterans with PTSD overcome their stress and have a working companion. It helps those that are suffering with drug addiction have an animal that gives them a sense of calm during times that they have anxiety. We could actually do two things. We could get from pink underwear in Tent City to a caring, compassionate environment that benefits animals every day and provides a benefit to inmates that could be sustainable. And again, I wanted to do it without costing taxpayer dollars through our regular budget. So our ask is coming from the private sector. Who wants to make a contribution to help us build this facility? Because I promise you, As an example, PetSmart gave us the first $2 million because they believe if we can do it here, they can replicate it across the country in other jail systems, and we could be the tip of the spear in making change in that way. So those are the kind of things we're trying to do for criminal justice reform. And I know I was all over the board with it, but you have to be.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue, no doubt. And as you mentioned, we are coming up on the end of the hour. I want to kind of close with sort of a two-part question. And we've been asking this to our community leaders that have visited with us. So what's keeping you up at night? And then when you wake up, what drives you in the morning to tackle the next day?
Well, what's keeping me up at night? I don't get sleep. So I don't know anything's keeping me up, because I think you have to go to sleep first before you can be kept up. But law enforcement, I ask this question often: is it terrorism? Is it the protesting? Is it opioids? Is it all those things are issues for me? But what keeps me up at night is the thought of who is the next generation of law enforcement. If we don't transform who we are to become the profession that most see us as, which is reputable, honorable, desirable. If I can't look to the next generation of young adults and inspire them to want to pursue a career in law enforcement, we have problems we'll never be able to overcome. I need to find a way to work with my employees and other agencies to transform who we are to who we could be. And suddenly, when I became a Phoenix police officer 100 years ago, we went down to Civic Plaza and there were 1,000 people testing, and I think there were 50 openings. Right now, I could have a classroom with 40 seats and I'll only be able to fill 10 of them or 15. Now, I did tell you we saw a surge in hiring, which is good, but it's a different time. And with social network and all the distractions and things that kids are attached to, they want to be a Kardashian. They don't want to be a Paul Penzone. And I'm not saying they should want to be me, but I would hope they'd want to put this uniform on. So what keeps me up at night is, how do I build an organization and contribute to a profession where young men and women say, when I get out of college, I want to go serve in that capacity.
And then when you wake up, when you keep, I guess, when you're awake in the morning with the light again, what drives you? Where's your optimism these days?
I lost the last part of your question. I think you're asking what drives me.
Yeah.
This right here, it says it's got a title in front of my name. It says sheriff. It was never on my bucket list. I'm on house money. The fact that you all gave me the chance, or at least some of you believed in me, and others are stuck with me, to be the sheriff. I want to make sure that when I move on to the next stage of my professional career, which hopefully won't be for a little while, I can look back, and it doesn't matter if you knew my name, but it does matter if suddenly you had a sensation about the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office that gave you a sense of pride. That's what drives me. I've been given the greatest privilege imaginable in this profession. People say, isn't it tough being sheriff? And I joked about not getting sleep, but they say, isn't it tough being sheriff? I'm like, I roll out of bed on the sheriff of the 4th largest county in the nation, with 3,500 men and women every day asking me to help make it better for them so they can make it better for a community. If that doesn't motivate you to go to work and try to be a difference maker, I don't think anything can. So I'm a lucky guy. I'm blessed and privileged, and every day I'm sitting in the seat and wearing these silly stars on my collar. I'm going to try to make sure that I'm deserving of it.
Well, Sheriff, I want to thank you for your time today, for your service and the service of the men and women that serve under you. Can't thank you enough. But before we go, I do want to make a statement. Yesterday, I put out a statement about George Floyd and what happened, and the fact that our country really is at a crossroads, and we need to live up to the ideals set forth in the Declaration of Independence about being a country where all men are created equal. And I stand by that. I believe that. I think we can never stop doing that. But I had someone who I greatly respect remind me that I do need to also acknowledge the fact that there were a lot of folks out there peacefully protesting, and we need to encourage that and acknowledge the work that you do, the work that Chief Williams does. I think that's very important, and that there are many, and the vast majority of our law enforcement that are doing the right thing. And also to acknowledge that there were a number of our businesses, members and non-members, that were impacted by these riots, and that we support them as much as we support you. So I wanted to say that. I want to continue this conversation with you, Sheriff, and obviously this fight to make sure that we are the society that we say we are. So thank you for your time. Thank you for everyone for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you the next time. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. You can stay blessed and safe. We appreciate you.
Bye-bye.